Hello, my name is Elahe Lopez, and I am an alumni of the speech and debate team at DHS. I just graduated this year. So let me go to my first slide. So I'm going to start off and introduce myself, and then I'm going to ask each of you to introduce yourselves if you're okay with that. So like I said, my name's Elahe Lopez. I just graduated from DHS, and I'm going to be starting my freshman year of college in September at Columbia University in New York City. And I personally loved doing speech and debate in high school because it was a place where I was able to share ideas and perform and talk about things that I was really passionate about and wanted to learn more about. And I just learned so much even from watching other people perform and just opening up dialogues with people, having those conversations. So that was one of the main reasons I joined speech and debate. And then our team at DHS specifically is really special because we have a really great community. Everybody's very close and very, like, we're all really good friends with each other. And I think the team culture is so strong and so great. So the people on speech and debate really became some of my best friends. So that was another reason that I loved doing speech and debate, and which is why I'm glad that all of you are looking into trying it because it's really great. And then, yeah, I don't have any questions. I'm here to answer your question.
The question I have about speech, is there any prize money for speech contests?
That's an excellent question. Actually, there is not. You do get an award if you manage to do very well, and if you get judged well and you place first, second, or third, you will get like trophies or a medal or something like that, but there is no cash prize at the end of competitions. Great question. So let's start off basically just talking about two different events that I did when I was in high school. The first one that we're going to talk about is dramatic interpretation. So what is dramatic interpretation? So this is one of the main speech events that you can do. And the way it works is a dramatic interpretation is when you take a published piece of work. So this can be like a play, a movie, a book, even like an article from a magazine. It just has to be something that was published somewhere with like a copyright and everything, so that it's like kind of like legal for you to use and recreate. And what you do is you have a space of 10 minutes. So you will take whatever published piece that you're like looking at. If, let's say like we're looking at a book and you're like, okay, I have to figure out a way to cut this down into a 10-minute long speech, right? So you'll go through, you obviously will have to cut out some parts of it that aren't that important, but you'll basically take the most important parts of the story and piece them together to make one coherent performance. And so basically the reason that we're doing dramatic interpretation, the reason that it's called that is because the nature of your piece should be dramatic overall. So it should be emotional, maybe sad. Basically, it doesn't even have to be like devastatingly like awful and like really like depressing. It just means that the main point of the story is not like to be humorous or comedic. The main point is to draw out emotions in the audience, action from the audience. So that's what a DI is, and it's, we usually say DI. Hold on, let me fix my internet. Yeah, okay, I think I'm okay. So basically the way it works is you don't get any props or any costumes to perform this speech. So it's not really performance in the way you would usually think, like you're on stage, like performing like a show. There are no props and no costumes. You are the only person on stage and you perform the entire piece by yourself. So that the way this works is when you're trying to act out like movements, you kind of like, you pantomime them. But like let's say if I pretend like I'm taking a book off of a shelf, I would reach up like this and like pull it open, and then I would like pretend to flip it open and maybe like read it, like I'm turning some pages or I'm looking at it and something's weird. Like you have to act out all the movements and make the audience believe that you are actually doing the movements without having any props to help you. Does that make sense? So does anyone have any questions so far? Feel free to unmute yourself or drop something in the chat. I can take a look. Yes, like a monologue. Yeah. So it actually is pretty much like a monologue. It depends on the kind of piece that you decide to use. So if you choose like a book that has lots of dialogue, so like multiple characters talking, you will be the person portraying both characters talking, and I'll talk more about that later. But you can also choose a piece that is like a monologue where you're basically just giving a speech to the audience, maybe recounting an event that happened or just like talking about something. It just depends on whatever piece you pick. But yes, it can be like a dramatic monologue. Let's see if there's any more. Can you show us a video of a DI? Yes, I can definitely show you a video of a DI at the end. Let me just get through the rest of the presentation and then we'll watch some examples. Let's see, where did this originate? Also, does everyone have to be from the work you're interpreting? Every line, so the entire piece, you must take it straight from the published work. You cannot add your own words to it because the point is that you're supposed to be taking somebody else's work and interpreting it the way you think it should be interpreted. So that's where the creativity comes in, because somebody might take a look at a script and perform it one way, and another person will look at the same script and perform it a totally different way. So it depends on how you yourself react to the piece that you're doing. So so that's, you don't really add your own words to it. You're using like an already established piece, and the creativity comes in with the way that you yourself perform.
Who had the idea for it? Like, did this start out with play acting, and also like in general, kind of how were these events created?
I don't actually know a lot of the history of speech and debate, but what I do know is that speech specifically actually started off as just literally like taking somebody's actual speech. Like, let's say, like we all know, like Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s like "I Have a Dream" speech. So you take a speech that somebody else has given and you perform it as if it's your own. So that's what speech itself started out as. It started out as like taking a speech that was already written and performing it. Then it started to branch out into these different events where maybe there's an event where you can write your own speech, or there's an event like dramatic interpretation where you're not taking a speech, you're taking like a book or a movie or a screenplay or like a play, and you're performing it as just one person. So I don't know exactly specifically like who came up with the idea for DI, but I do know it kind of evolved with like speech and debate as like an activity in like schools. DI just kind of evolved from like people's desire to perform something instead of just like giving a speech like the way we would normally think people like give speeches, you know? So that's a great question. Let's see who else has questions. How much time do you have to prepare your piece? Great question. Okay, so the way that speech kind of works is obviously there are tournaments that you can go to they usually take place from like a Friday through a Sunday. You go to the tournament and you enter and say, I want to do dramatic interpretation. And then the team like signs you up, and then you go to the place that the tournament is held. Usually it's at a school or even like a college campus. And you go to different rounds of competition where you basically go to a room and there's a judge who watches you perform and then basically writes down notes and says, I think this person was great, I'm going to give them first place, or I think this person could have improved, I'm going to give them like fifth place. And so what you do is, you know that a tournament, like let's say I know a tournament is coming up in October, so I can start right now looking for a piece that I want to do. I can start thinking about how I'm going to cut it, how I'm going to perform it, what kind of like voices I'm going to use, what kind of actions I need to do. So you have as much time as you want to take before a tournament to basically prepare and memorize this piece. Because when you go to a tournament, you're expected to have your memorized piece ready to perform. And so that's kind of how it works. It's not, and so the way the year-long like competition season works is you come up with your speech in like the beginning of the year, and then you perform that speech at every single tournament that you go to for the rest of the year. So your speech is, you come up with one speech and you perform that one for the whole year, because throughout the year you can keep on working on improving it and maybe changing a little, like some stuff based on what your judges give you like feedback on, so that by the end of the year you have a great piece that you can maybe take to like a bigger competition. So that's how that works. That's how long you basically have as much time as you want to like work on your piece before like any tournaments. Yeah, I hope that answers your question. Let's see if we have any other questions. Yeah. Okay. So does anyone have any questions that they want to like ask out loud before I move on? Are we good? Okay. So I'm going to go to the next slide. So the next type of event that I'm going to talk about is one called program oral interpretation, also known as thematic interpretation for this reason. The way that a thematic interpretation speech works is instead of choosing, like for DI, you choose like a book and you're like, I'm going to perform excerpts from this book and put them together as one speech, right? For thematic interpretation, you take multiple different sources. So let's say you're going to pick like a poem, you're going to pick an article from a newspaper, and you're going to pick a book, and you're going to pick like a movie script. So you have like 4 different sources, all from different authors and stuff, and you will take little pieces from each of these mediums and put them together into a speech that you can then perform as like a coherent speech, even though you're taking like 4 different things and like ordering them together to put them into a speech. And so you're thinking maybe like, how the heck would you come up, like how would you decide which pieces you're just going to put together? Is it random? No. The reason it's called thematic interpretation is because you choose one central theme that's like a topic that you want to talk about. And then you pick pieces that basically discuss whatever topic you decided you want your theme to be. So this might sound a little confusing, so let me give you an example. The piece that I did for my senior year, my theme was a question. It was, what does it mean to be a woman in America? So it's a pretty broad topic, right? I decided to focus mainly on the nature of sexism, discrimination against women in the US specifically. So what I did was I found a poem kind of about a woman's experience being harassed as she walked down the street. I found an article about this woman who had accused a man of assault and about her experiences in court. I had a couple articles about different women's experiences basically facing like gender-based harassment at work. So do you see how each of these pieces is united on this common theme, but you can talk about it in different ways? So sound like the poem was a lot more emotional. The article was full of like statistics and facts and stuff like that. So it's all about coming up with like a range of different types of pieces that you can put together, but that you have to make sure that they unite well. Like you have to make sure they can flow well, which is why you have your one central theme that you want to discuss. So the way that poi, this is what we, like that's how you pronounce like P-O-I, poi. The way it works is you actually get one prop. Unlike DI, you get no props. You get one prop, which is a small black binder, and you can see it in the picture right here on screen. The guy is holding the black binder because he's performing a poi. And this small black binder contains your entire script written out on the pages inside. That's a requirement. It cannot be an empty black binder. It must be a black binder with your speech inside. And you actually have the option of you can read the speech as you're giving it. So it might take a little heat off. You're like, oh my gosh, I don't think I can memorize a 10-minute long speech. You could read out of the binder. It's allowed. Typically, most people don't because it comes off as a little unprofessional. And you can it's easier to perform when you have it memorized. If you're trying to read, your voice tends to get kind of monotone. So most people memorize it. But so you have your black binder. And so the great thing about this black binder is that it serves as your medium to basically be as creative as you want. With this black binder, you use it to basically convey your actions in a way that you can't in DI. In DI, if I wanted to pretend like I was taking a book off the shelf, I would literally have to like hold air and pretend like I was reading the book, right? But with this black binder, you can use it for whatever you want. You can open it and pretend like it's an umbrella. You can move it around. You can like hit it to create like a drum sounding beat. You can do like anything you want. I've seen people like literally cradle the binder to pretend like it's a baby. the binder is such a good way. It's so helpful to help you like convey whatever it is, like whatever your actions are that you're trying to talk about. And it can really add a lot to your speech. So that's why POI is really interesting, because it's actually like the only speech event that actually allows you to have a prop. And so I like to think that POI is even more of a creative event than DI, because you have, even though you're not writing the speech yourself, you're taking different pieces. You get to decide which pieces you decide you want to put together. You get to decide how you want to cut them. You're like, maybe I want to put one line of this poem, and then I want to do like 3 paragraphs of this article, and then I want to do like 4 lines from this book. You can order it and cut it up and switch it around however much you want to create the message that you want to send. You just have to make sure you're using the author's words, but you can like put it all together like a patchwork quilt until like you can stand back and say, this is my story, this is my message, and I'm going to like put all these pieces together to show you what I want to say. So I just think it's a really amazing event, because you can choose all these different pieces that you've enjoyed or that you think have a really powerful statement and put them together however you want. So POI was actually the first event that I ever did when I joined speech. And let me just tell you, it is one of the most rewarding events that I've ever done. So I obviously am a little biased. I also did DI. I love DI. But POI was definitely my favorite because it was so creative. So, okay, now we can stop and answer some questions. If anybody has questions, they can drop them in the chat. Let's see. Can you use songs? Yes, you can. You can use songs. A lot of people actually sing as one of the pieces. They sing in between like some of their other pieces, and it can actually be really powerful. I've seen one where people literally will use the binder as like a drum beat, and they like sing along with it, and it's honestly, it's incredible to watch. It's really amazing. So yes, you can use songs. Good question. Let's see, anybody else? Can you show us a POI? Yes, I will show you a POI, I promise. And so I know the way I described it might be a little confusing, but I think as soon as you actually watch a performance, it will make more sense how you like put the pieces together and like chop them up and stuff like that. Okay, any more questions? Does anybody want to like say any questions, or you want to just keep dropping them in the chat? Anything is fine. We good? Yeah? Okay, so I'm gonna move on. All right, so let's go back to DI. No. Yes, let's go back to DI. So you might be wondering, like, how the heck do I even get started, like, doing this? It's kind of, like, overwhelming. There's obviously, like, an infinite number of, like, books and movies and stuff out there. So I would say to start looking for a piece that you want to do, a published work, start with the things that you've read, things that you watched that you very specifically remember. I'll give you an example. When I was looking for a DI this year, I remembered a book that I had read in 9th grade called Speak by Laurie Howes Anderson. I don't know if any of you guys have read it, but it was basically it's a very sad book about a girl who's attacked at a party, and she basically stops talking because she's scared of what's happened to her. And the whole story is basically her journey to regaining her voice, regaining her power, and like being able to like make a mark for herself on the world. So it was obviously very emotional. And when I was thinking about doing DIs, I was thinking about all the books that I read, and that one really stuck out to me because it was a really emotional, dramatic story, but it had ultimately a really good message that I really liked and that I really wanted to convey. So I decided to do that piece. And so I think the best way to find a piece is not to go looking willy-nilly for random things. I think the best way to start is on your own bookshelf or on your own like movie collection. Think about the pieces, things that you've seen, things that you've read that have really impacted you, that you really remember specifically because they were so impactful, and you can start there, because if you've been impacted by something like that before, then there's definitely going to be a good chance that you'll be able to convey those emotions well to have an impact on the judge that will ultimately be judging your performance. So for DI, the acting that you do specifically is a lot about, it's a lot more about conveying an interesting story and bringing out emotions in the judges. It is not necessarily about acting out a ton of different like voices and characters. You can have multiple different characters in a piece, but the main point is to focus on the story itself and bringing the emotions, making the judge feel sad when you want them to feel sad, or angry, or like worried or scared whenever, by like through your actions and through your voice and your speaking. So that's kind of the main point of DI. The acting that's like, somebody asked earlier about if it's like kind of like a monologue. So if you do like a monologue where it's you speaking, it's even more challenging because you have to be, even though it's just you talking in your normal voice, you have to be able to convey that message and make the judge believe that you're the person like telling the story. Does that make sense? So that's kind of where the creativity for DI again comes in just how you decide to perform it, how you decide to change your voice, or how you decide to move around the stage, like all of that. And so if you see over here on the slide, I have kind of like a story arc. I think many of you have probably seen that in school, where like the pattern that a story follows to basically keep you engaged. So the way that a DI starts is you start with something called a teaser, which is where you can use a tiny bit of the speech or like the piece that you're using from the beginning and basically grab your judge's attention. So maybe you start off with a really jarring line like, "I didn't know my mom was gonna leave." And then the judge is like, "Whoa, where is that coming from? Tell me more." So like you'll start off with something that will grab their attention and you start to kind of bring them into the story. And then after you've done a bit of a teaser, you'll start off with an introduction. So this is where the introduction is where you become yourself again. So like in the teaser, you've already become the character that you're acting out. But when you're in introduction, you're like, okay, hi, this is me, the speech competitor that you're about to watch, and now I have to tell you the title of my piece, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about what it's going to be about. So you would step back and you'd be like, I'm going to use Lady Bird again. You're going to be like, the piece that I'm going to do is Lady Bird, and it's about this girl who fights a lot with her mom and is going to go to college and like blah, blah. So you kind of give them like a little synopsis and you tell them the title and the author and basically set up the rest of the story. Then you go back into being the character and you establish kind of the rising action for the conflict that you're going to have eventually. So you kind of like establish like things that they might go wrong, or like just like parts of the story that they need to know to understand the climax. Then you get to your climax, which is like the emotional peak of the piece. So that's when you want to bring the judge like to the highest point of impact with your emotions. It's kind of like the whole point of your piece is to get to this climax. Then after that, you'll do your falling action, which is kind of like your conflict resolution, where you kind of like explain the aftermath of the climax and how things have worked out since then. And then you get to the end and conclude, and that's pretty much it. So all of this obviously comes from the published piece that you took. So like if you're taking it from a book, you would make sure you find the climax and use those lines, and then you would find the falling action and use those lines and perform that. So that's kind of how you decide like what kind of story arc your piece is going to follow. I've seen some questions pop up, so I'm going to answer those. Can you use more than 4 sources for a point? Oh yeah, I'll get to that in a second. Excuse me, sorry, I need some water. Okay, so now for poi. Basically, the way you start off deciding on how you're going to like put your poi together is you will most likely start brainstorming themes that have a message that inspires you, or that you care about, or that makes you want to learn more, just something that interests you. And it doesn't necessarily have to be something like huge and impactful. It can be something like, I've seen pois that focus around a theme of love. Like, what is love? What are the different types of love? How can you show love? You know, like stuff like that. You like start asking questions and figuring out what themes you want to like talk about. It can also be something like, if you want to address like racism, then you talk about racism against which communities. What are the consequences of racism? Do you want to talk about violence, or do you want to talk about like microaggressions? Like, are you going to talk about like psychologically the impact of racism? There are all these different things you can explore, but you should start off with a general theme that you want to go off of. Then So like I mentioned before, poi will usually have 4 or more pieces. So you can have more than 4 pieces. I usually stick with like around 5, but you can definitely do more. But the important thing that you must do with each piece, you have to consider each piece to be a new character. So what do I mean by that? Maybe I'm using a poem, so my voice will like kind of like, I'll sound like this, and I'll keep my voice a little softer, and my motions will be very fluid. But then my next piece is supposed to be like a satirical piece where I'm supposed to be funny and loud. So then I'll take my binder and I'll wave it around and I'll be talking really loud and I'll be making a lot of faces because like that's the character for that specific piece. Then the next piece might be kind of sad. So I'll kind of like hunch into myself and bring my binder in close and look down while I talk, because that's the character for that piece. So each piece that you include in your poi must be a different character because your audience needs to know when you're doing a different piece. Like when you're switching from, they need to be like, okay, that was the poem, now she's switching to do the article, and now she's switching to perform the snippet from the movie, and now she's switching back to the poem. You see, so you have to be able to tell apart each of your characters. The binder we talked about, it's a prop. You can use it to tell your story. It can be a really effective way to do that. And then much the same as a DI has a story arc, a poi also has a story arc, which you can see on the right. I'll explain that right now. So the teaser, just like the DI, you'll take a little bit of the beginning of the speech that you're doing, but because in a poi you have like 4 or more pieces that you've put together, you'll take a tiny little snippet from every single piece and basically perform each of those in a row. Then once you've reached the last one, then you do your introduction. In your introduction, you step back and you talk to the audience as yourself, not as the character. You just say like, hey, this is me, the speech competitor, and my theme is about love. And then you talk about, you mention each piece. You'll say, the title of this one is the history of love, and the title of this one is blah, blah, blah. So you'll introduce each piece and then give a tiny little synopsis about what your speech is about, and then you keep going. So then the rising action is exactly the same as the DI. You set up the conflict, but you have to make sure you do it for every single piece that you have. And then the climax, for the climax, not every single piece has to have a climax. You can just take one piece's climax. So like, let's say if you're using like, because like if you're doing like a poem might not really have a climax. It just kind of, it's like written and like it kind of has a story and that's kind of it. Or it can just be like a random poem that's really short. So it doesn't have like a climax. But if you're using like a book, then it'll definitely have like a distinct rising action, climax, falling action. So maybe you'll use the climax from the book. But you can also combine like multiple climaxes from multiple different pieces. It all depends on like the pieces that you choose to use. And then you'll have a falling action at the end where you have to resolve the conflict of every single character. So you have to make sure every single piece gets a resolution, basically. Let me see if there are questions. Feel free to drop any questions in the chat. I'll answer them right now. Yes, Kessler, you have a question? Do you want to unmute and ask, or you want to drop in the chat? Anything's fine.
I just wanted to say, what are some things you don't want to do in the general types of interpretations? General. Like, what are some things you don't want to do?
Things you don't want to do, like generally, technique-wise, I would say you want to make sure you have your piece memorized. You don't want to forget it, or you don't want to have to read off a script because that definitely doesn't look good. And you want to make sure that you're fully engaged with your piece. You don't want to seem like you're bored or like you don't like what you're doing or that you don't want to be there, because the whole point is to get the judge to be engaged with you. So if you're bored, they're going to be bored. So you have to make sure you're choosing a piece and working on it in a way that like you're passionate about and that you're interested in doing. And that like actually has an impact that you want to have, like a message that you want to talk about. Does that kind of answer your question? Yeah?
Yes.
Okay, great. Okay, let's see. How long do the speeches need to be? Great question. So both poi and DI have a time limit of 10 minutes. There is no minimum time limit, so technically you could talk for 3 minutes if you wanted, but the general unspoken rule is that you fill the entire 10 minutes, because a 3-minute piece doesn't have enough time for rising action, climax, falling action. So you need to have your speech fill that 10 minutes as well as you can. But yeah, so you can't go any longer than 10 minutes. But like, let's say if it's like 8 minutes, that's okay too. But you want to keep it as long as you possibly can so that you can get as much of the story in as possible. That was a great question. Thank you. Okay, do you have to be linear with either poi or di? Like, can I start with scene 1 and skip to scene 3? Yes. Okay, so that's a great question as well. I think what she's trying to ask is, with like, if you take your book and you say like, this scene is on page 5 and this scene is on page 50, but can I like maybe switch around the order? Like, can I do the scene from page 50 first and then the scene from page 5 later? Yes, you can. That's the great thing about it, is you can take all like different chunks from whatever piece you're doing and rearrange them as much as you want, as long as you're using the words that the author has used. That makes sense. So like, if you can take like the last page and perform it as the first part of your piece, if you want, that's totally fine, as long as you're like literally saying the words that were printed on the page. But yeah, so that's the cool thing, and that's actually called cutting. When you take your piece and you cut pieces of it, like you cut little chunks of the piece and you rearrange them to put them into like a coherent speech. You can totally do that. And same thing goes for poi. You can take your little pieces of each piece and put them in whatever order you want. Do the words you use have to agree with each other, or can you can use opposing viewpoints? Great question. So I think you're talking about poi for this one. For poi, whatever theme you're talking about, let's say, also I'll use my theme that I used, what it means to be a woman in America. Let's say I use one piece that's like a woman talking about her struggles, but then I want to make my point about what it's like to be a woman in America. Maybe I'll take a piece where a man is saying, I don't think women face discrimination in this country. Obviously, that's an opposing viewpoint to what my point that I'm trying to make is, yes, women are discriminated against in this country. But by using a piece where it's like somebody arguing the opposite, I can actually use that to basically convey my message in an even stronger way with even more viewpoints, even more perspectives. It's all about how you perform it, and it's all about how you want the audience to look at whatever topic you're talking about. But you can totally use you can even like be posing a question where like maybe it's something like what are the like what's or okay, here's an example. What are the like benefits and harms of addressing climate change? So maybe you'll use one piece where you're talking about global warming and how like the ocean levels are rising and like polar bears are going extinct. But then maybe you'll use a piece by like a person who works in a coal mine who needs the money to support their family. Obviously, like if climate change movements shut down coal production, that person's going to be out of a job. They won't be able to provide for their family. So that's like a new viewpoint that maybe you bring in. So if the judge thinks, that wouldn't be so good. But then, so all of a sudden you're challenging the way you're thinking about it. So like, that's just an example, but like, there's so many things you can do with poi to like basically convey a message, or even just to open up questions and talk about something interesting. So there's so many ways you can do it. So yes, that was a very long answer to your question, Vivian, but yes, the answer is you can absolutely use pieces with opposing viewpoints as long as you have like a specific message that the judge understands. So you're not just talking about like random things. Does that make sense? Okay, great. Does anybody have any more questions? Anyone? Okay. So I'm gonna keep going, but if you have more questions, drop them in the chat. I will answer them, I promise. Okay, so I was gonna have you guys brainstorm some specific ideas that you wanted to talk about, but I think I wanna instead show you some examples. I think that would be a better use of our time, just because I wanna make sure that you guys like kind of see exactly what I just word vomited on you. I want you to see it in action. So let's start out. Would you guys like to see a DI or a poi? This is the one that I want to show you. So if it's okay with you guys, I'll stop and pause it and kind of like explain what's going on and like point out things that I mentioned in the lesson I just gave. But so this her theme is debate like a girl. That's kind of like the slogan of her theme. And so basically her topic is about the way girls are treated in debate and how that's sometimes it's not necessarily beneficial to the girls who are debating. And yeah, so I'm just gonna play this for you guys. And, yeah.
The title of the program, Debate Like a Girl.
Everyone good? Okay.
On an island of music, in a city of drum beats, the drum girl dreamed of pounding tall conga drums, tapping small bongo drums, and boom, boom, booming with long, loud sticks. Welcome to the second presidential debate. Secretary Clinton, knowing that educators assign viewing the debates as homework, do you feel you're modeling appropriate behavior for today's youth? Well, thank you. I think that's a very good question. Be wrong. Because, thank you, Secretary Clinton, you're out of time. Being a female debater, I get interrupted all the time. Male debaters are often encouraged to talk louder when someone interrupts them. But females are taught to say things like, excuse me, may I finish my point? As a man, you can be almost as aggressive as you want, but, well, women walk a fine line when they choose to go on the offensive. Sexism in debate manifests itself in many ways. It is often difficult to know where to begin. Over the last decade, the number of women participating at the Tournament of Champions has decreased. The ratio of men to women at the National Debate Tournament and Tournament of Champions is 4-to-1. This is not meant to imply that all women have the same experiences in debate. Rather, our goal is to let this manual serve as a starting point for future discussions, recognizing how sexism exists in our community, but everyone on the island of music, in the city of drum beats, believed that only boys should play drums. In a
Okay, so that was her teaser. So if you remember, we talked about a teaser. You see, she introduced the beginning of every single piece that she is going to use. Muted, and then you could see like her face was doing like different facial expressions that the audience laughed at. And let me see your guys' chat. Okay, let me start again then from what I was saying. So what you just watched was the girl's teaser, which we talked about. The teaser was basically an introduction from every single piece. And I think if you guys noticed, she did every single character differently. So she started off with the banging of like the binder to be like the banging of the drum for the drum story. And she was like a really musical voice to kind of like convey that story. But then like when she was pretending to give, when she did the Hillary Clinton like debate voices, she used like a very different voice and a very different style of speaking, and she carried herself differently. But so if you guys notice, like every single character was very different and helped her convey each piece that she's going to be doing in the rest of her speech. So she just finished her teaser, and you notice she closed the binder, and now she's standing in a neutral position because now she's going to do her introduction, where she's going to tell you what her speech is going to be about, and she's going to say the titles of all the pieces she's going to use. So yeah, I just wanted you guys to notice that. Any questions? No, we're good. Okay, so I'll keep going.
2013 study entitled Men Outspeak Women, Analyzing the Gender Gap in Competitive Debate, Dr. Emma Pearson analyzed over 35,000 speaker scores to conclude a significant statistical disparity between the success of males and females in debate rounds. Overwhelmingly, it becomes clear that speaking while female has considerable disadvantages, not only in terms of competitive success, but also with higher rates of interruption and a general lack of respect for speech. As a society, our expectations for females in public speaking put women in a double bind: either conform to societal expectations of submission and lose credibility, or demonstrate intensity and be labeled too aggressive. This unwinnable bias is so deeply ingrained in our culture that we have often become blind to its consequences, reflected in countless reports of harassment toward young female debaters. I love speech and debate, and this activity thrives on calling out oppressions all over the world. But it's time to call out the ones in our own community. So, through the prose, Women in Debate, a Best Practices Manual by the Women's Debate Institute, and Gender Disparities in Competitive High School Debate by Daniel Tartakovsky, the poetry Drum Dream Girl by Margarita Engel, and articles from The Huffington Post, The Politic, The New York Times, The Washington Post, Women's E-News, the Student Press Law Center, and the Des Moines Register. Debate Like a Girl, a program, because the speech and debate community should amplify voices, not silence them.
Okay, Hani, sorry, just to answer your question, the video is longer than 10 minutes because you can tell like the audience is clapping and laughing in between. So she has to stop her speech to wait for them to finish clapping so she can keep going. And you saw like the guy at the beginning had to introduce her before she came out on stage. So all that has added like 3 minutes. But if none of that was happening in a normal tournament, her speech would be 10 minutes long. That would be the limit. But yeah, that was a good question. Sorry, I should have mentioned that. And yes, Emily, you do have a 30-second leeway on the 10 minutes. You technically have until 10 minutes and 30 seconds to do your speech. They give you that little 30 seconds as just like a grace period just in case. But it cannot be any longer than 10 minutes and 30 seconds. And technically it's supposed to end at 10 minutes. Let me see other questions. Yes, Hani, the timer is stopped whenever the audience laughs or claps for a really long time, especially at the national tournament. That's just how that works. Yeah, okay, so let's keep going. So now, sorry, so this is the end of her introduction. So now she's gonna get back into the characters and keep going with her speech.
And that's a 3-0 decision. Are my judges ready? Public forum debate is one of the most popular debate styles in the United States. Despite these developments, evidence suggests the existence of a serious gender gap in the debate community. Male debaters are more likely than female debaters to persist in the activity, and all else being equal, they will accumulate more experience and perform better. Make sure you're not overly aggressive. Flats? No.
Sorry, I just want to mention one more thing that you should notice. So she was doing that one character where she's pretending to be the female debater, and then when she's switching to this character, she turns the page. That's a way to show the audience that you're switching from one piece to another. So that's one of the other ways that you can use the binder to help you or to help the audience understand what's going on. By turning the page, she's signifying that she's changing to another character so you can follow the story a little better. So I just hope you guys noticed that.
We heels did not seem presidential. Since we haven't had a female president, it's tough to hear something on a ballot as vague as the perception of being presidential. Because, well, presidential as a concept has only ever come to us in the form of a man. All right, next question. Secretary Clinton, believe you can be a devoted president to all the people of the United States? First and foremost, I will do everything I can. No to, no reach, run. Why don't you interrupt her? You interrupt me all the time. So the drum dream girl had to keep dreaming, quiet, secret, drumbeat dreams at outdoor cafes that looked like gardens. She heard drums played by men. But when she closed her eyes, she could hear her own imaginary music. Women are less likely than men to win debate rounds, and men are 12 percentage points more likely to win an elimination round than women. These findings are significant. Gaining a more nuanced understanding of why men enjoy more competitive success than women would help the community minimize the likelihood that women are denied opportunities and treated unfairly. Monitor your emotions in response to your opponent. Skirt, too short. Doesn't smile enough, needs to stop shouting. The other female high school debaters I know have been belittled, told to smile more, and often get more in-depth criticism of their hem length than their argumentation. Ugh. Last year, male debaters in the area had this running joke that my friend was secretly a man, theorizing that she wrapped a penis around her leg. We as a society have created certain norms, such as what types of voices, styles, and mannerisms we think embody persuasiveness. Unfortunately, this ideal debater image tends to be the opposite of a large amount of perceived female qualities, like higher voices and less aggression. At home, her fingertips rolled out their own dreamy drum rhythm on tables and chairs, and even though everyone kept reminding her that girls have never played drums, the brave drum dream girl dared to play. So she practiced. I hate that I don't have the full freedom to fight the patriarchy in the way I want to, because it's a competitive activity. I'm in the room to get that ballot. So I just keep going. Naggy, shrill, and bitchy. There should be public speaking courses for women because they're handicapped.
Excuse me, I can't hear it anymore.
I'd rather see your nudes than win the round and debate you as an equal. After the female competitor reported the male student, he was barred from only one debate tournament and then went on to become an assistant coach of the debate team. If a female speaker cannot manage to overcome the built-in disadvantages of her gender, that's her problem and her failing. And she practiced. I have been called a dyke, voted down for being too passionate about feminism, and told that my narrative about my past was made up. It is not fair that judges resent judging me from the start. Women in debate face sexist jokes, getting hit on, cyberbullying, being talked down to, stereotypes, exclusion, and comments about their bodies that I cannot control. I cannot control. I cannot control. And she practiced, and she practiced, and she practiced. if she spread her legs. Why are we treated unfairly in an activity meant to empower everyone? Women deserve tournament and team experiences equal in quality to men. My goal is to raise awareness of these challenges so that women's voices as well as men's are heard loud and clear. If we assure that we listen right here, we can make a difference for women whose voices are truly suppressed. The world will be better. So, the Drum Dream girl closed her eyes and kept on drumming.
Okay. So, can you guys hear me? Yeah, okay. So I hope I didn't want to interrupt the speech anymore to comment on anything, but I'll talk about now what you could have noticed during that. So I hope you noticed after her intro, she started on her rising action. And then when she got to the climax, you could very clearly tell her voice was raised, her face was different. She was using the binder, and you could really tell what the emotional peak was, because after she had been loud and projecting, she stopped and she stood and allowed the judges to process the emotions going through her face, the emotions of what she had just said. And then at the end, we saw the falling action where she talks about how to fix this and how women need to be respected more in debate, what we can do. That's kind of like the falling action, how she decided to conclude it. And she ended on a note of hope with the drum girl story, and showed how the drum girl was able to keep going. Okay, so she followed the structure of like the story arc for the play very well, and I hope you noticed that every single character got resolved by the end, and we saw every single character's resolution, and we were able to tell which one was which because of her voice and because of the way she used the binder and because of the way she carried herself, or the way she like walked across the stage and stuff like that. So yeah, those are just some things that you could have noticed. And so yeah, that was a really excellent ploy. Does anybody have any questions or comments? They want to talk about anything? Feel free to drop it in the chat or unmute yourself and talk.
That was really dramatic.
Yes, it was.
I'm just saying, like, the voice escalating was really high, and her voice really raised high, and also she had a really good tone of voice changing.
Yeah, I'm glad you noticed that. Yeah, a lot of that like voice modulation is really what makes a piece shine, and it really is what conveys the emotion. Like she could have said the same words, but if she had just been talking like this, it would have been so boring. You wouldn't have cared. But with that, like everybody was like, was holding their breath because it was just like so like impactful. So yeah, I'm glad you noticed that. That's like those tone changes of the voice really makes a performance that much more like impactful. Now I'm going to show a DI, but I have to find.
Wait, that wasn't dramatic interpretation?
Nope, that was the ploy because she had the black binder. Remember, dramatic interpretation, there are no props.
But that was already pretty dramatic to me.
Yeah. Poise, that's the cool thing about poise. They can be very dramatic or they can even be funny if you want. It really just depends on what you want to do. But yeah, most poise are pretty dramatic because they're talking about topics that are really difficult and like just difficult to talk about.